In your section about the three main arguments that atheists use for advancing science, the flat Earth, the Earth-centric universe, and evolution, I'm curious if you could complete your thoughts on the evolution one. And what are the best responses for someone saying, natural selection does account for all the diversity that we see. Therefore, what is talked about in the Bible is obviously not true.
Question is about evolution, and I think when we're talking about evolution, we need to make a key distinction, two key distinctions, if you will. One is evolution as a scientific idea, for which there is a lot of evidence, I agree. And the other is, you might say, Darwinism as an ideology. And that's a little bit different. Now, why do I say Darwinism as an ideology? Well, first of all, just consider the word Darwinism. It's rather odd that we even have it. You have all these guys running around, I'm a Darwinist. I've never met a guy who's running around saying, I'm an Einsteinian. Why not? Because Einstein had an idea. Einstein had a theory. Einstein's theory is right, but it's not a worldview. You can embrace Einstein and be a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative. It tells you nothing about what else you think about the world. But somehow with Darwin, that's not the case. You have evolution, the scientific idea and fact, and on the other side you have Darwinism as a kind of metaphysical battering ram that is often used against Christianity. And so in some senses, all these scientists will go around saying, I'm really baffled that all these Christians have turned against evolution. Well, if you want to know why, go look in the mirror a little bit. Because too often atheists have been able to use evolution as a kind of bludgeon to attack Christianity, and the scientific community has remained completely silent about it. I opened my daughter's 8th grade textbook, where you're first introduced to ideas about evolution. Most of it's totally fine. Pictures of the fossil record, descriptions of the Cambrian explosion, descriptions of the evolution of the eye. I'm okay with all that. And then suddenly I see something like this. And therefore Darwin has conclusively shown that it is completely superfluous to posit a creator. And I say, wait a minute. That is not a scientific statement. That is a metaphysical statement. And what is it doing in a biology textbook? So, to answer your question, I think my focus is not in trying to combat evolution by introducing some rival idea. What I would rather do is focus not on putting some rival theory in, but trying to get the atheism out. Second point, if I can make very briefly, Darwin had two sides to him, which are often confused. There's Darwin, the discoverer of evolution, and then there's Darwin, the guy who turned against God. It's often believed that Darwin turned against God because of evolution, but no. If you look at Darwin's diaries, read some biographies of Darwin, you see he turned against God mainly because of a younger daughter, Annie, age 10, who became sick and unexpectedly died. And as Darwin began to ruminate on death, it occurred to him that his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, not to mention many of his family and friends, he said, they're skeptics, they're not believers. If Christianity is true, these people are on their way to hell. And Darwin said, but they're incredibly nice people. He said, I really can't abide and worship a God who would do that. Point I want to make is Darwin turned against God more on the issue of suffering and evil than on the issue of evolution. So as Christians, it's quite possible to embrace Darwin as a scientist while rejecting, if you will, his atheistic turn. Those are two different faces of Darwin. On your way out, by the way, I did a column on this in Christianity Today, and it's sitting on a table outside. So if you want to learn more about this, just pick up one of those. Yes, sir.
This is an issue I've been kind of wrestling with. You mentioned earlier how the new atheism kind of secular humanists, one of the things they've done right has been to try to still promote virtue, although under different kind of bolstering, without God. And then you mentioned toward the end of your speech that you think, how to get out of judgment. Well, they explain away the judge. So I'm wondering, does the new atheism tend more towards a kind of a rational modernism or a more kind of valueless postmodernity? Or is that not a good distinction, and is there something at work between both those views that's actually going on that they're not acknowledging?
Yeah, postmodernism, I think, has pretty much had it. And by that I mean that the new atheists, certainly to a man, reject postmodernism. Their argument is not, this is my truth and you can have your truth and who's to say what's true. These are guys straight out of the Enlightenment. Their argument is, we have the truth and there is no God. We have the truth and the afterlife is a myth. So they are arguing on the ground of truth, which I think as Christians we should welcome, engage them on that ground. Now the question about trying to disentangle virtue from religion, well, there are two problems here. They're worth just noting very briefly. One, it was pointed out by the philosopher Nietzsche, and that is the idea that all this morality came out of an understanding of a transcendent God. That's how we got it. Take something simple. How did we get the idea that all men are created equal? Thomas Jefferson says it's self-evident. I think it's not evident at all. In fact, inequality, not equality, is the evident truth. People are different in size and speed and strength and stamina and intelligence and perhaps moral behavior. So what do we mean even to say all men are created equal? Jefferson himself, who was a man of the Enlightenment, a man of science, rather unorthodox, you might say Christian, in trying to identify the source of our rights, could only think of one, our Creator. So in other words, the idea is, it is because we are created equal in the eyes of God, therefore, we should respect each other's rights, etc., etc., etc. Now, here's why I'm telling you this. Someone can say, well, we don't need God. Why don't we just keep all the virtues? But Nietzsche's point is, you can't actually do this, because ultimately, if you give up the underlying foundation, over time the building will begin to weaken and totter, and pretty soon it's going to collapse. This is Nietzsche writing in the 19th century. He says, I predict the next century is going to be the bloodiest that mankind has witnessed, because the removal of transcendent horizons is going to set man against man with a vengeance that has never been seen before. In some senses, you see here what can be called atheist prophecy, a very insightful understanding of the implications of what Nietzsche calls the death of God. The second problem, I think, which I won't go into, I might address, I'm going to speak to some students tomorrow night, is the evolutionary foundations of morality, an effort to create a substitute basis for morality, an effort that is being pursued with unbelievable tenacity, and I think spectacular lack of success. But that is another story which I'm going to put on the shelf for now.